السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. Welcome back to another class on Islam and critical thinking, where we have been discussing the role. We've been discussing the role of the aql in Islam. The concept of reason. Raise your hands if you've attended 2 or more sessions, just so I know how many people. Okay, mashallah. Okay, excellent. So, in the last class, we spent a little bit of time talking about Tarikh al-Aql, the history of the Aql. And what we mean by the history of the Aql, like initially somebody might say, well, how does it make sense to talk about the history of the intellect? Right? We don't talk about the history of eyesight or the history of any other human faculty. But what we mean by the history of the aql is we're looking throughout history at how people have had different understandings of the aql, and we're looking at the history in terms of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the aql, what role He gave the aql, what ways in which we see the aql being used correctly throughout history. So we talked about how the aql is related to the fitrah. We talked about the aql in the time of Prophet Adam alayhi salam. We talked about how the aql can be corrupted by shirk. And we talked about the rise of shirk in the time of Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. And last week we talked about which prophet? Who can remind us? Which prophet did we talk about last week? Yes. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Exactly. Last week we talked about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. And specifically, we focus on the connection between aql and da'wah. The connection between the aql and da'wah. How do we understand and explain the message of Islam to others and share the message of Islam with others? And one of the important lessons that we took from last class is that when we talk about what it means for Islam to be logical, what does it mean when we say Islam is rational, when we say Islam makes sense, there's a difference between saying, yes, Islam as a religion makes sense, this is why I accept Islam, why I am Muslim. There's a difference between saying that versus saying that I need to have a reason to follow each and every command in Islam. There's a big difference between those two things. So you can say that Islam makes sense. It's a logical message, it's a rational message. It makes sense to believe that Allah is the creator, that Prophet Muhammad is a messenger. And that doesn't mean that therefore every time the Prophet tells me something, I say, wait, Ya Rasulullah, I can't follow this instruction unless I first use my aql to try to find evidence that proves that this instruction is valid. You see the difference between these two, right? So once we prove that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our Lord, the Prophet Muhammad is our messenger, then we submit entirely. We understand that it is only logical to follow whatever the Prophet Muhammad mentions. And in fact, to use our aql to try to question what the Prophet says would actually be illogical at that point. Would actually be illogical. And this is an analogy that some of the scholars give. They say, imagine the aql is like, in our times you could say like a cab driver, a taxi driver. And you get in the taxi and you say, I need to go meet so-and-so mufti. I have an Islamic question. I need to meet this imam. Please take me to the imam. So he takes you to the imam. He's your aql is your Uber driver. He takes you, you get out and you go and you meet the imam. You ask your question. And as you're leaving, the taxi driver is there and he says, by the way, I disagree with what the imam said to you. I have my own fatwa. And he gives you his own fatwa. And you say, but you're not an imam. Why am I going to listen to you? He says, but I'm the one who led you to him. I led you to him, so you should take my advice rather than his advice. Right? This is what where some people get confused. They say, the aql leads us to Islam. Therefore, we have to question every ruling within Islam using my own aql. And people don't understand the concept of intellectual humility. So in last week's class, we explained the difference between something being irrational versus super-rational. Okay, something being irrational means it doesn't make sense to my aql. It doesn't make sense at all. Versus something being super-rational means that I understand it makes sense to follow Islam, but the wisdom behind this ruling may be beyond my understanding. You guys see the difference? Is it clear? Okay, any questions about any of that from last class? Guys, good? Okay, inshallah. So we're going to continue reading a little bit from the book, and then we will continue discussing the topic of the history of the aql. So we're reading from the work of Imam Ibn Hibban, the great hadith scholar. He died 354 Hijri, and he wrote this work, Rawdatul Uqala, the Gardens of the Intelligent, talking about the concept of reason from Islam, the concept of what it means to be an intellectual, what it means to have intelligence from an Islamic perspective, what it means to have critical thinking. So I believe last time we reached the statement of Muawiyah bin Qurra, and that's where we stopped. Is that correct? Yes. We finished that statement, yes. So we'll continue from after that, inshallah. تفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سمعت حفص بن حميد الأكاف يقول العاقل لا يغبن والورع لا يغبن.
MashaAllah. So this is an interesting statement that compares aql with wara'. So this is comparing the intellect with piety or fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's saying that when you have developed and mastered the intellect, you are not deceived by others. And when you are God-fearing, you do not deceive others. So these two things go hand in hand. And this is the first point where we really see the aql in a different light in his discussion. So we talked about how the aql is connected to morals, it's connected to spirituality. To be rational means, from an Islamic perspective, to be a moral person, a kind person, a generous person, a righteous person, a just person, somebody who worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We saw all these connections with aql. So you might think, up until this point in the book, you might think, this means that the person who has the aql, they're going to be so nice to others, so kind to others, that other people will take advantage of them. And here's pointing out, no. He brings this statement that the aqil, the person who is intelligent, the person who is wise, is not deceived by others. So part of having aqil means, yes, you are kind, you are generous, you give to others, you're always looking out for others and the well-being of others, but you don't allow others to take advantage of that. Right? You don't allow others to deceive you. So the person who is wise, he is not deceived by others. He's not cheated by others. He's not scammed by others. Right? And there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ which establishes the same meaning, which is the Muslim is not stung from the same hole twice. Right? The Muslim does not get stung from the same hole twice. So, in other words, the person is wise. They don't allow themselves to be easily fooled. And if they're God-fearing, they don't deceive and scam other people. Right? So these two qualities go together in the believer, that the wise person avoids being scammed by others, and being God-fearing, he doesn't scam other people. Now,
قال أبو حاتم رضي الله عنه هذه لفظة جامعة تشتمل على معاني شتى فكما لا ينفع الاجتهاد بغير توفيق ولا الجمال بغير حلاوة ولا السرور بغير أمن كذلك لا ينفع العقل بغير ورع ولا الحفظ بغير عمل وكما أن السرور تبع للأمن والقرابة تبع للمودة كذلك المروءات كلها تبع للعقل وعقول كل قوم على قدر زمانهم.
No, we'll stop here. So he mentions Imam Abu Hatim. Now he's commenting on this narration, which is the statement of Hafs bin Humayd. So he says about this statement that this is a comprehensive statement. It's a comprehensive teaching that includes many different lessons. And he says, just as ijtihad is not going to benefit you if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't give you tawfiq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't grant you success. And beauty does not benefit a person without charm. And happiness does not benefit a person if they don't have safety. In the same way, the aql does not benefit a person if they are not God-fearing. And this is a key criticism we can see of secular materialistic civilization. The aql does not benefit if it is not accompanied by piety, if it is not accompanied by being God-fearing. You can have a very technologically advanced civilization. You can have scientists. More scientists are alive today than have ever been alive in human history. Right? More scientists are alive today working on all sorts of experiments, all sorts of research. And yet we have one of the most profoundly immoral periods of time in human history in terms of the amount of bloodshed, in terms of the amount of devastation, in terms of the things that we're witnessing. Massacres of children, torture, all these kinds of things. So you have, this level of so-called intellect, but it is detached and separated from spirituality, from being God-fearing. And so it doesn't benefit. It does not create a successful civilization because this type of intelligence is a secular notion of intelligence. It is intelligence that is just, I can solve a very complex mathematical formula. I can design a very, sophisticated scientific experiment. But what about how that aql is actually used to transform me ethically in terms of my responsibilities towards the creation and my responsibilities towards the Creator? Human beings have abdicated their ethical responsibilities. So this is where the aql is not leading to any benefit. It says the aql does not benefit without piety, without being God-fearing. And he mentions in the same way, memory does not benefit, memorization does not benefit without action. A lot of times, this is a problem that students of knowledge can fall into. Students of knowledge, when they're studying Islam, they start, memorizing a lot of names of scholars, right? Abu Hanifa said this, Shafi'i said this, Ibn Qudama said this, right? And they start memorizing the names of different scholars and different opinions, but that is not the be-all and end-all of Islamic knowledge. In fact, that's not even the foundations of Islamic knowledge, to know the opinions of this scholar or that scholar. In fact, that's what sometimes people use to impress others. Look, I can quote this sheikh, I can quote this imam, I can quote this scholar. Well, actually, Imam an-Nawawi said this. But that kind of memorization is not what it means to actually be Islamically knowledgeable. Remember we said in one of the previous classes, true knowledge, as the statement of Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu said, true knowledge is a light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places in the heart of a person. لَيْسَ الْعِلْمِ بِكَثْرَةِ الرِّوَايَةِ. Knowledge is not just having lots of narrations. It is a light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places in the heart of the servant. And that transforms the way a person acts. So knowledge has to transform a person's actions. And he mentions in the same way that happiness follows from safety. You have to first establish safety and security for an individual before they're able to achieve happiness, right? People are living in a war-torn situation, right? Bombs are dropping on their heads, and you're talking to them about, imagine now you're a psychology counselor, you're a psychotherapist, and you have a client who's living in a war-torn situation, and you tell them, well, you know what? Happiness is on the inside. No matter what's happening to you, you can always be happy. And this person has no food security, no shelter over their head. They're not in a state of safety. All your counseling is neglecting the surrounding situation. And that's why there's a problem with taking only the approach of psychology while neglecting the social sciences, right? Or neglecting the social context in which people live. So in the same way that he mentions that moral values come from the aql. You can't talk about having moral values without talking about a comprehensive understanding of the aql. A comprehensive understanding of what is intelligent thought, what is intellectuality, what is rationality, what is reason. You have to understand reason in its proper light in order to talk about how we can build human civilization, how we can lead human beings to become ethical, how we can lead human beings to transform themselves. Then he mentions the intellects of people are according to their age. And this is a statement that I find very interesting. It can be interpreted in different ways. One way you can understand it is that depending on your age, there's a different meaning of wisdom, depending on what age you are in. There's certain lessons you take from your age in terms of what it means to be wise and how you should act and how you should conduct yourselves. And another meaning of it is, depending on what period of time you live in, wisdom can be different. So the lessons of what wisdom would have looked like maybe 100 years ago can change based on today, right? And this is where, we're talking about a scholar who lived 1,100 years ago. We're talking about the lessons of wisdom that he had, but there are also things that are context dependent, right? We live after the Industrial Revolution. We live in a world of nation states. We live in a society that is built on a secular democracy. We live as a Muslim minority. We're living in many different layers of contextual differences between us and this author. So he's pointing out, even from his time, that what the aql looks like in your time may be slightly different, because you have to take the fundamental values and apply them to your specific time period and understand how they apply in your time period. Now we'll finish this section.
وعقول كل قوم على قدر زمانهم فالعاقل يختار من العمر أحسنه وإن قل فإنه خير من الحياة النكدة وإن طالت والعقل الموعي غير المنتفع به كالأرض الطيبة الخراب والعاقل لا يبتدئ الكلام إلا أن يسأل ولا يكثر التماري إلا عند القبول ولا يسرع الجواب إلا عند التثبت.
Now, so here he mentions, so he says that the wise person chooses the best from his age, even if a person lives a short life. This is an interesting point that he mentions. He says that it's better to live a short life that is a life built on wisdom and built on righteous actions, good deeds, etc., rather than living a long life and in your life you accomplish nothing, right? And if you look at some of the scholars of Islam, you have scholars like Imam al-Nawawi, for example. He died in his 40s, and yet Imam al-Nawawi is one of the most famous and influential scholars in the history of Islam. If you divided up all the writings that he did in his lifetime, it amounts to several notebooks every single day that he would have written. Imam al-Nawawi, he wrote the most influential text of fiqh in the Shafi'i madhab, al-Majmu'. He wrote the most influential commentary on Sahih Muslim. He wrote al-Arba'in al-Nawawi, right? They compiled the 40 hadith that are some of the most foundational hadith in our religion. He compiled Riyadh al-Salihin. He compiled a work on the etiquettes of those who learn the Quran. So there are so many influential works that he compiled, and yet he lived a very short period of time. So what he's pointing out is that the barakah in your life is not based on how long you live. It doesn't matter whether you live a long, long life or whether you live a short life. What matters is whether you live your life with wisdom, with aql, with righteousness, with accomplishing good in that period of time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you. So the person who has a mind that is filled with benefit is beneficial, just like fertile earth is beneficial, right? It brings forward crops and vegetation, unlike the earth that is barren and dry and that doesn't bring forward anything. And he mentions that a wise person doesn't begin speech unless he's asked for his opinion. It's a very interesting point. So now he's mentioning again some of the etiquettes of wisdom. We live in a time period where everybody is rushing to give their opinion, right? He says, a wise person does not initiate speech until he is asked. He does not engage in excessive debate unless he knows that there's a chance the other person is going to accept what he's saying. So you don't start debating and arguing, and there's no likelihood that the other person is even open to your opinion. If the other person is not even open to hearing what you're saying, you're wasting your time. This is a sign of lack of wisdom. And he does not hasten to give an answer except when he has tathabbut. He's well versed in what he's saying. If he's well versed in what he's saying, he has expertise, then he gives his answer. He doesn't give a jawab if he is not really sure about what he's saying. Right? Now,
والعاقل لا يستحقر أحدا لأن من استحقر السلطان أفسد دنياه ومن استحقر الأتقياء أهلك دينه ومن استحقر الإخوان أفنى مروءته ومن استحقر العامة أذهب صيانته.
So he mentions that part of wisdom is you don't look down upon others. And this is something that I find very interesting because in our modern education system, the more you progress in your career and your education, the more you're almost conditioned to look down upon those who have less education. Particularly, I find this in medicine. There's almost an institutionalized arrogance, right? So you have the attending physician, the fully trained supervising physician, talks down to the fellow, and the fellow talks down to the resident, and the resident talks down to the medical student, and the medical student talks down to the pre-medical student. And now they're making efforts to correct this, but I've seen situations where it's really bad. The arrogance with which people talk. Like as a medical student, I remember sometimes having this experience where the attending wouldn't even look in your direction. As a medical student, you're not even worthy for me to look at or hear your voice. You're not a fellow, let alone a resident. You're a medical student, right? And subhanAllah, this is something that I really try now as an attending physician myself to change this culture and to introduce an ethical approach to how we teach and how we educate. Remove this culture of arrogance that is so embedded and entrenched unfortunately in the medical education, but also in university education in general, this kind of arrogance that people look down upon others. So he mentions the wise person doesn't look down upon anyone. No matter how progressed you are in your education, if somebody comes to you and they ask a question seems to you silly, don't speak down to them. Don't belittle them. It's interesting sometimes if you go through the medical system as a patient or as a family member of a patient, and you see how much some doctors and nurses speak down to patients, talk to them in a very belittling way, and then suddenly they realize that the family member is a physician, and they get embarrassed and they say, oh sorry, I should have been explaining this properly. And you see how they rush through terminology and belittle somebody's intellect, and they say you wouldn't understand this, you wouldn't understand this, and then they get embarrassed when they realize that actually they're speaking to somebody who would understand it. So don't look down upon anyone. Don't look down upon anyone. And he mentions several categories that people look down upon. He says, if you look down upon somebody or you hold in contempt somebody who has a position of authority, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage in terms of your dunya, in terms of securing your worldly needs. If you treat with contempt the righteous, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage in terms of your deen, in terms of your religious needs. So somebody who has worldly authority, if you mistreat them, you talk down to them, you disregard them, you're not being very diplomatic. You're going to compromise your ability to obtain your worldly needs. And as for those who are pious, God-fearing, if you say, oh, look at these mullahs always praying in the masjid and this and that, you speak down upon religious people, you've ruined your deen, right? You've compromised your commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by speaking down upon those who may be actually of the people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regards as His awliya, as His chosen friends. And as for somebody who looks down upon and belittles his brothers in the community, he's nullified his muru'ah, his decency, his dignity. And somebody who looks down upon the commoners, the general public, he's nullified his security in the general community, right? So no matter what category you mistreat, you're always putting yourself at a disadvantage. So part of wisdom is you don't talk down to anyone. You don't hold anyone with contempt. You don't think highly of yourself and think lowly of anyone. There might be somebody who is a commoner who knows something that you do not know, even if you're a scholar of the deen, or a very well-educated person, a professor, whatever it may be. There might be somebody who knows something that you don't know. So you always have that attitude of intellectual humility. Now,
والعاقل لا يخفى عليه عيب نفسه لأنه من خفي عليه عيب نفسه خفيت عليه محاسن غيره وإن من أشد العقوبة للمرء أن يخفى عليه عيبه لأنه ليس بمقلع عن عيبه من لم يعرفه وليس بنائل محاسن الناس من لم يعرفها وما أنفع التجارب للمبتدئ.
So he mentions here that a wise person does not allow himself to neglect his own shortcomings. For the wise person, they don't allow their shortcomings to be hidden from them. They're always aware of their own deficiencies, their own flaws, their own defects. Because somebody whose own shortcomings are hidden from him will also lose sight of other people's good qualities. There's an interesting connection here. If you don't see your own flaws, you don't see other people's positives, right? Because you think so highly of yourself, you're only seeing your own positives. You think you're, the smartest person. You think you're, the most dignified person, the most qualified leader, whatever it is. You lose sight of other people's good qualities. So in fact, the attitude of a wise person should be the opposite. To be aware of their own shortcomings, their own weaknesses. I mentioned that we have this kind of funny scenario where people come for a job interview and you ask them, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? And strengths, they can mention lots. When it comes to weaknesses, they try to turn that into strength and say, well, my weakness is that I'm a perfectionist. I work too hard. I always show my weaknesses. I always just do everything everybody asks me to do. I'm so good. Right? They don't want to mention any weakness. Right? So people have this attitude where they're not even aware of their own weaknesses. And that creates a society which is very dangerous. It's actually very dangerous if you have an entire society or a community where people are all completely blind to their own weaknesses. Nobody is working on self-improvement. And everybody thinks they're the greatest person there, right? And then imagine what the leadership of such a society will be like, right? It's going to be even more problematic. So he says one of the worst punishments for a person is that their defects become hidden for them. It is one of the worst punishments, one of the most severe ways in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may punish a person is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just causes their shortcomings to be hidden from them. They don't see their own flaws. SubhanAllah, any relationship in which somebody doesn't know their own weaknesses is bound to fail. For example, you talk about marriage. In a marital relationship, if the husband or the wife, if they refuse to see their own weaknesses, they refuse to see their own flaws, that marriage is set up for failure. In fact, this is one of the things that some of the most experienced marital therapists, they call one of the red flags in a relationship. One of the famous authors of many works of marital therapy, John Gottman, he talks about the four horsemen, the four major dangers that can arise in a marital relationship. One of them is defensiveness, right? Somebody gives you feedback and says, it would have been nice if you had communicated more when we were leaving the house about this or about that. And immediately you start to defend yourself. No, it's because you told me this and I said this and that. You never acknowledge your mistake. If you never acknowledge your mistake, that's a big problem in a marriage. If you never acknowledge your mistake, that's a big problem. And if you never appreciate the other person, that's also a big problem. So he's saying the person who doesn't see their own mistakes, their own weaknesses, they're also not going to see the other people's good qualities. This happens in so many marriages, right? This is part of the aql. You could be a professor at a university, you could be a Nobel Prize winner, but you could have a completely dysfunctional marital relationship because you don't have true aql. You don't have true wisdom in seeing how to take care of your own deficiencies and how to recognize the strengths in others. And two words that, if people said, it would fix so many family relationships: the word I'm sorry, the phrase I'm sorry, the phrase thank you. A lot of people can't even say these phrases. They rarely say them. So when you say I'm sorry, you're acknowledging your own weaknesses, your own shortcomings. And when you say thank you, you're acknowledging the good that the other person has done. And some people even try to twist this around. So they say, oh, I'm sorry if you thought I meant that. I'm sorry if you were so upset you didn't understand what I was saying. Right? So that's not a real apology, right? Or they say, thank you for seeing how great I am. So they turn everything around. So subhanAllah, we're seeing the wisdom that he's talking about. It's wisdom that doesn't just apply in terms of our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or our ethical responsibilities, in the community or abroad, but even in fixing our family relationships and our family dynamics. Like if you're a young student of knowledge, one of the most important objectives for you should actually be, how can I improve my relationship with my parents? How can I improve my relationship with my spouse? How can I improve my relationship with my siblings? Because that is part of your journey of gaining ilm. That is part of your journey of gaining true aql, true reason and true wisdom. Because you're internalizing the Islamic values in your life. This is what wisdom is. This is what wisdom is. And so he mentions that a person who doesn't recognize their own weaknesses, they're not going to be able to remove them. And a person who doesn't recognize other people's strengths, they're not going to be able to benefit from them. And then he says how important and how beneficial is experience for the beginner. How important is experience for the beginner? So learn from other people's experience. So why does he mention experience at the end? He's saying all of these things that he's talking about, you learn this with life experience. You learn it with life experience. The idea that don't waste your time getting into debates if the other person's not going to accept your opinion no matter what. Don't rush to give your answer until you're asked, right? The idea of learning from other people's positive qualities, learning to recognize your own negative qualities. The idea of don't hold other people in contempt. Don't look down upon others because you don't know who may actually be more knowledgeable than you, more righteous than you, so on and so forth, right? So all of these different things he's talking about, you will gain them with life experience. Tayyib. Are there any questions about what we discussed so far before we shift gears and go back to talking about Tarikh al-Aql? Yes. Right. Fools learn through their own mistakes. Yeah. Yeah.
And then one thing that you mentioned here is that you learn through your life experience. Was it something like we always talk about intergeneration knowledge?
Yes.
Knowledge. Right? So if we have some knowledge base that comes with part of youth, but because the youth are in a different paradigm completely, they are going to reject that and say, probably we don't know any better, just because they assume that the point that you're coming from, that knowledge base doesn't apply to the world we live in today. So is it then that you just let them be based on the text that they will just learn that themselves?
This is a really good question, and I find that, this is something that a lot of people talk about. This idea of one parenting approach is, you know what, don't bother giving your life experiences to your kids. They have to learn by making their own mistakes and just learning the hard way. Let them learn the hard way kind of thing, right? And other people say, no, they should learn from your experience, your history, so they don't have to go through those mistakes. The answer is a little bit of both. So yes, one of the things actually he comes to it later on, he talks about how such a big part of the aql is who you spend your time with. You're absorbing from the wisdom of elders, from those people who have more experience than you. He mentions that explicitly. So you have to gain that experience. But there are certain things you will just learn only through your own experiences as well. So both of them go hand in hand. There will be intergenerational experiences that you inherit and you benefit from. And then of course you have to actually make decisions yourself too. So one of the problems that we have, some parents are like, okay, I just want my child to learn everything from me and all the experience that I have, so I will always make the decisions for them. That's a big problem. And the parent says, okay, this is what you're gonna do, what you're gonna eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This is what courses you're gonna take at school. This is which school you're going to go to. This is. And the child never learns to make any of their own choices. And that's actually a problem. You should teach your children from an early age how to make their own choices, how to make their own decisions. So even, for example, for my toddler, I don't just pick out his outfit and dress him. I pick two, and I give him an option. Do you want to wear this or do you want to wear that? What is that doing? It's building within him confidence to make his own decision. And what's interesting is you see this also in education in many different ways. So again, coming from the medical perspective, I'll give an example that is familiar to myself. So I did my residency training in Winnipeg. In Winnipeg, when you're on call, or at least at the time that I was on call as a resident, we didn't have a supervising physician in-house in the hospital backing up every decision that we're making as residents. So many times when we report something, when we make a decision, we give a diagnosis, that will determine whether or not the patient goes to surgery, and they're not going to call the physician at home who's supervising, they're just going to go based on that. So that's a big responsibility you have. It forces you to have a level of confidence and clarity when you make that call and say, this is what I think it is, and it pushes you to take on that responsibility. Versus you see in, other schools, I won't mention schools by name, I don't want to disparage anyone's medical training, but there might be some situations where people always have that blanket of extra protection, right? They have senior residents, fellows, supervising physicians, all available. So they never learn to make a confident call themselves, right? They never learn to make that diagnosis themselves with confidence. And I see how that leads them as after they graduate, they never gain that confidence. And they're always hedging in their report saying like, maybe it could be this, it could be that, I'm not sure. It could be this, could be that. And they never come up with a clear answer because they never have been conditioned to take responsibility for their own decisions, for their own, for their own thoughts, for their own ideas, their own conclusions. And so that's something we should develop not only in education, but even in parenting. Empower your children to make the decisions themselves. Give them that advice. Give them your experience. Tell them, this is what I learned from. But then say, at the end of the day, these are the choices, and I trust you're going to make the right choice. I think that's actually the best approach. Yes. So this is a statement of Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anh. What he's explaining is that knowledge is not just having a lot of information. We live in an age where people regard knowledge as just information, just data, right? The more data you have, the more knowledge you have. The person who Googles the most is the most knowledgeable person. And this creates an idea where everybody thinks they're a keyboard expert, right, on the internet. Everyone thinks they're an expert. What Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh is saying is that true knowledge is a light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants to a person. Just like when you're in a dark room and the lights come on, you can see where you have to walk, right? You can suddenly see the path in front of you. You can see where the obstacles are. In the same way, knowledge is enlightening. Knowledge actually leads to an understanding of where you have to go in life. Knowledge leads to an understanding of what is your objective in life. What is your worldview? What is your origin? What's your purpose in life? And how that knowledge will actually frame your decisions. So true knowledge is actually connected to your values. True knowledge is actually connected to making the right choices and avoiding the wrong choices. So that's the Islamic perspective of knowledge. Does that make sense? Yeah, so actually, I go even beyond that. So from the Islamic perspective, you have pure information, is just khabar, right? That's information. Then information combined with fahm, understanding, creates ilm, knowledge. Then knowledge combined with how to implement the knowledge is hikmah, wisdom. And wisdom combined with how do I implement this knowledge in this situation and in future situations to ultimately get me to where I want to be in life, that is hidayah. So Islam is telling us to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not just for khabar, information, not only for fahm, understanding, not only for ilm, knowledge, not only for hikmah, wisdom, but for hidayah, the highest level. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Grant us guidance along the straight path. Hidayah is the highest level. Does that make sense? Any other questions? Yes?
In the beginning you mentioned about time frame.
Yes.
So now in this time, you start questioning about what was the wisdom behind it.
Yes. Right.
Where do we put a stop?
Right, so where do we put a stop when people ask, what's the wisdom behind this, what's the wisdom behind that? So, it's like when you buy a car. Okay, when you buy a car, you may test drive the car, you look at certain specifications about the car, what's the gas mileage, this kind of thing, you know, what are some of the major features, but you don't open up the hood and ask, explain to me how the engine works, right? From A to Z. Tell me every single thing, and prove to me that this engine is not going to, malfunction when I start driving it. Right? You don't go into that level of trying to understand all of the operations. There might be others who have that level of knowledge, but you recognize that you just need to know the major points in order to purchase the car. In the same way, when it comes to finding the truth in life, whatever answer gives you the true message for all the major questions in life. That's the truth. That's the correct message. That's all you need to understand that Islam is the truth. Now, you might say, well, you know, it's a really interesting question. What is the wisdom behind this particular ruling? I want to learn more about the wisdom behind this ruling. But just because you don't know the wisdom behind a ruling doesn't make you doubt your Islam. You see the difference, right? So you won't say, okay, if I can't understand the wisdom behind this ruling, all of a sudden that's it, I don't want to drive the car. You would say that, no, this is still the best vehicle. I know that, my aql leads me to understand that. Because of all of its features are the best, I just don't know how this particular feature of it operates. So I need to rely on the scholars who have that level of understanding. So there may be some things that the scholars have talked about in terms of wisdoms, and there may be some wisdoms that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has left beyond the understanding of human beings, right? There may be some wisdoms we only learn about in Jannah, right? But we still understand that the rulings, they make sense because they're built on that foundation of a clear, logically coherent message, which is the message of Islam, that you have a purpose in life to worship your Creator, to follow the guidance of the messengers, to take care of the rights of the creation. There's a clear message in Islam. As long as that message makes sense, it answers the purpose of life, I don't need to worry about all the detailed wisdoms behind a particular ruling. Does that kind of answer the question? Yeah. Yes? Hmm? So, khabar, information, fahm, understanding, ilm is knowledge. So, information plus understanding gets you to knowledge, right? And then knowledge plus how to use that knowledge is hikmah, wisdom. And then wisdom, in terms of applying it to get where you want to go to your final destination, when you use wisdom to get to your final destination, or to know how to get to your final destination, that is hidayah, that is guidance. Clear? Any other questions? There's some kind of background noise. Is it only me who hears it, or you guys? Yeah, it's driving me crazy. I don't know if there's a way to turn down the... Testing. Yes. Yeah, that fixed it. Okay. Jazakallah khair. It interferes when they're praying. Yeah. Oh, in the recording. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, Jazakallah khair. طيب. Any other questions before we shift to talk about Tarikh al-Aql, the history of the Aql? No? It's clear? Okay, so coming to the history of the intellect. So we talked about, again, Prophet Adam alayhi, Prophet Nuh, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi. So roughly speaking, if you want to give yourself like a rough timeline, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi is roughly 2000 before Common Era. Of course, this is prehistory. People don't know exactly when Ibrahim alayhi was, but like roughly speaking, 2000 years before Common Era, so like 4,000 years ago. Now, if you look at other developments and that happened since the time of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi, we have, of course, many different ancient civilizations that developed, and they developed the use of the aql in different ways. Okay? And this is what I want to highlight today is the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Al-hikma dalatul mu'min haythuma wajadaha fahuwa ahaqqu biha. Wisdom is the lost property of the believer. Wherever the believer finds wisdom, he has the right to use it, to benefit from it. So wisdom can be found in many different civilizations. So for example, the ancient Indians, they invented the number 0 in mathematics, right? That's a wisdom we can benefit from. The Chinese invented paper, right? That's a wisdom that led to an incredible amount of flourishing of knowledge within Islamic civilization. The ancient Greeks, they had certain ideas, and we're going to talk about that, certain frameworks, classifications that Muslims also benefited from, and a lot of their knowledge about astronomy and medicine was translated into Islamic civilization, and Muslim scholars critiqued it, analyzed it, and developed their own knowledge that advanced the field further. There's some European historians who had the view that the Arabs or the Muslims basically just took Greek science, they didn't build on it, and then they passed it back to the Europeans, right? Which is now an outdated notion. Everybody knows now that this is actually false. And when you study the history of almost every scientific discipline, if you study optics, the father of optics was, does anyone know? Ibn al-Haytham, very good, mashallah. Ibn al-Haytham, the father of optics. The father of surgery was? Does anyone know? That's a very good guess. Al-Khwarizmi was the father of mathematics. He invented algebra, basically. The father of surgery was Abul Qasim al-Zahrawi. The father of or one of the most important thinkers in the history of medicine, the one who discovered how the blood circulates through the lungs, or pulmonary circulation. Does anyone know who that was? Do you know, Tahsin? No. This should be one that you know. This is Ibn al-Nafis. Ibn al-Nafis, Iraqi scholar. He discovered many centuries before William Harvey. William Harvey is often credited in, actually in the older medical textbooks. Now the newer ones are mentioning Ibn al-Nafis. Several centuries earlier, discovered how blood circulates through the lungs. So you have all these thinkers in so many different disciplines. Jabir ibn Hayyan in chemistry. You have Abu Rayhan al-Bayruni in astronomy. You have many, many different thinkers that developed and took knowledge from other civilizations and incorporated into their Islamic framework. Right? They incorporated into their Islamic framework, and they would challenge those aspects of philosophy that didn't agree with Islam. And that's actually how they made a lot of progress. So, for example, if you look at Abu Rayhan al-Bayruni, one of the things that's very interesting about what he did, and this is discussed in a work by a historian of science, Ahmed Dalal. He talks about the history of science and the history of science in Islamic civilization. Abu Rayhan al-Bayruni, at his time, the dominant model of how planets and stars, celestial objects, how they move, was the model of Ptolemy. Ptolemy was an ancient Greek philosopher. It's called the Ptolemaic model. And that itself was based on this idea from Aristotle. So before, nowadays we have the understanding of gravity and curvature of space-time. But before that, Aristotle had this idea that when you drop a rock, it goes to the earth. Why? Because it's from the earth, right? The rock wants to go back to its natural place. And air goes up because it's from the sky, right? So everything is moving to its natural origin. And so he had this idea that therefore, all of the celestial objects, they are moving in perfect circles around the earth. Okay, they're all moving around the earth, a geocentric model. So Ptolemy's model are these geocentric orbits of everything going around the earth. Now it turns out when you look at the observations, and so you had scientists looking at how the stars are tracking the movement of stars and planets in the night sky. When you do this, you start to notice something funny if you are using Ptolemy's models. One of the things you start to notice is that the planet Mars, it starts moving like this, and then it seems to go backwards, and then it goes forwards again. Okay, that's how it looks to us on Earth. So this motion, where it seems to go back, the planet Mars, they call this the retrograde motion of Mars. And how do you explain that based on Ptolemy's models? So now, those people who took Ptolemy's models, they said, no, we have to follow Ptolemy's models because everything is based on Aristotle's principles of how things exist in the world and perfect circles and orbs spinning around. And so they came up with the idea that there are these epicycles. So it means that there are planets and stars going on little circles around a bigger circle. And that's why it looks like it goes backwards. And the thing is, you can create a perfect explanation of the models, of the data, based on that faulty model. You can create a model that fits the data perfectly and still stick with Ptolemy's models. It was the Muslim thinkers like Abu Rayhan al-Bayruni who questioned the model itself and said, why are you bringing in this Greek philosophy into the domain of mathematics and astronomy? Every science should be based on the observations and the methods of that science. We don't have to try to make astronomy fit your Greek philosophy. And because Muslim scholars were willing to critique those ideas, they were able to liberate science from philosophy. Because science used to be natural philosophy, used to be a domain of Greek philosophy. And once they disconnected science from philosophy, it was actually able to make significant progress in history, and then it was built more on observations, not making our assumptions about the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation is structured, but allowing ourselves to learn about the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking out the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His creation by actually making observations and creating a model that fits those observations the best, rather than superimposing all these assumptions about the natural world onto these models. So this was an important way in which Muslim scholars, they took wisdom from other civilizations, adapted it, and benefited from it, but did so in accordance with the Islamic values. So, two sciences that they focused on specifically were medicine and astronomy. Because these have benefits, right? So medicine allows a person to treat the sick, and there's such an Islamic emphasis on the reward for visiting the sick, the rewards for making dua for the person who is sick. So what about the one who treats the sick person, right? It's such an important emphasized concept in Islam. In fact, Imam Shafi'i, there's a statement from Imam Shafi'i about, to the effect of, were I not to become a faqih, a jurist, I would have chosen to be a doctor, right? Because of the emphasis on this concept of healing in Islam. So Muslim scholars took that knowledge, and they were able to benefit from that knowledge, and they removed those elements that didn't agree with Islam from it. In the same way, when it came to astronomy, a big part of astronomy at that time was astrology. Okay, astrology, the idea that where the stars are positioned in the night sky will tell us how to predict the future, how to predict what's going to happen to somebody. That, of course, the Muslim scholars said this is fortune telling, this is shirk, this is not something we believe in, right? Horoscopes and this kind of thing, positions of stars. And so what they did is they removed these elements that were superimposed on the science of astronomy, and they made it an empirical science. They made it based on the data, the observations. They removed those philosophical baggage and assumptions that were injected into it. So this is an important part of the history of the aql, because it's the history of benefiting from the wisdom of others without compromising our own values. Are there any questions about this part? I know I mentioned a lot of names and details, and I want to get a sense of how people feel before I go into too many more details. Any questions about this? Is it clear? Right, yes. Yeah. Yes. 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 That's what I'm saying. Yes. So they removed the astrology component, right? And they kept the astronomy component. Whereas for a lot of, in the pre-modern world, for a lot of people, that was mixed together. The benefit for the Muslim scholars use, so it was navigation. If you know the constellations at night, that's your GPS. That's how you know where to go. And in fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that in the Quran even. وَبِالنَّجْمِ هُمْ يَهْتَدُونَ. Through the stars, they are able to guide themselves, right? Through the position of the stars, they know where to go. So this was also something very natural for the Muslims living in the desert. You had, the Bedouins would learn how to navigate just purely based on the position of the stars. And Muslims paid attention to astronomy because of that, and also because of other things as well. So prayer timetables, prayer time calculations, that was another thing that required knowledge of astronomy. Knowledge of the months of the calendar, right, is based on moon sighting. It's based on a knowledge of astronomy. So all of this astronomical knowledge, it actually started to flourish within Islamic civilization. So Islam attaches a special significance to learning about the natural world. And therefore, that's why when people say, there's some atheists who say, don't call it Islamic science, call it Arab science, because it had nothing to do with religion. Actually, that's not true. Even secular historians who study it say, yes, it was very much part of religion. The Quran clearly was connected with encouraging and motivating the study of scientific knowledge, and even the implementation of that scientific knowledge was clearly connected with knowledge of religious obligations and rituals. Another example is the Qibla, calculating the Qibla direction, right? This is, again, based on mathematical knowledge, based on astronomical knowledge, using the astrolabe, right? This is another thing. These inventions that are using astronomical knowledge, using mathematical knowledge, but they also have clear religious functions as well. So the two are actually completely intertwined. And so, indeed, like, if you actually look at... There's some interesting discussion, because in the West, people talk about Copernicus as being that thinker who changed this model of thinking from the geocentric model to the heliocentric model, where the sun is now in the middle of the solar system, everything's going around the sun. This is the Copernican revolution, a huge landmark in scientific thought in the West. Well, there's good evidence that Copernicus was actually influenced by Muslim astronomers in this regard, and preceded by Muslim astronomers in this regard, like Ali al-Qushti and others. The observatories that they had in Samarkand, in the Muslim world, were doing all this kind of incredible research that only today, literally in the past few years, people are starting to research this. And we're pulling out these manuscripts of ancient works of Muslim astronomers, and for the first time, these manuscripts are being printed as books, and academics are reading them and realizing, wow, these guys were doing incredible stuff that people just weren't aware of. Any other questions? So we're making the adhan today at 10:15? 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, okay, inshallah. So 2 minutes for any other questions before we conclude. 5 minutes. No problem, no problem. If anyone has any other questions, or anyone wants me to elaborate on any other point before we conclude. Yes. Mhm. Yeah, it's a good question because I kind of covered like a lot of time. So between Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, then you have so I said like 2000 BC Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. You can imagine maybe like 1500 BC Prophet Musa alayhi salam, and then you have obviously common era itself is Isa alayhi salam, right? So 0 is with the time of Isa alayhi salam. And then we're talking about Islamic civilization. So this is after 600 years common era. So this is a long period of time that we're talking about. But you can see how all the lessons about the aql, they're cumulative. They're building on one another. There is another topic, that we could have discussed, which is the topic of mantiq, but it's actually quite technical, formal logic, and what did Socrates say and Plato say and Aristotle, and how did Muslim scholars respond to that? So probably too technical to do in the halaqah format. It's more for like a detailed course or workshop. Good question. So is there estimation of time between Adam alayhi salam and Ibrahim alayhi salam? People have given estimates in the past, but they're not very reliable. So the true answer is, Allahu alam, we don't know. Right? We don't know. And the estimates people gave, it was based mostly on knowledge they got from Jewish and Christian sources based on the Bible. And this was shown to not be very reliable. Right? So we don't know when Adam alayhi salam came. That's only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. Basically, written history probably starts around the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So before that, the prophets, who are the prophets that come before Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam? This is a good question to ask. Nuh alayhi salam. So Adam, of course. Adam, who else? Before Nuh alayhi salam, there's another prophet that's mentioned in the Quran. Sorry? No, Dawood alayhi salam is afterwards. Idris. Very good. So Adam, Idris, Nuh. Who else is before Prophet Ibrahim? Lut is the nephew of Ibrahim. Before Ibrahim. So Adam, Idris, Nuh. Who else? Hud and Salih. Hud and Salih. So Prophet Hud was sent to the Ad, and Salih was sent to the Thamud. So these are ancient Arab civilizations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed. The Ad and the Thamud. So these are all prehistory. We don't have any historical records related to any of these civilizations, right? Whereas starting with the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam, we do have archaeological evidence, some historical evidence of what civilizations existed at that time. And we know when Ibrahim alayhi salam went from Iraq to Palestine, that at that time in Palestine there were the Canaaniyun, the Canaanites, right? Those were the population that lived in Palestine at that time, right? So we know about the different civilizations that existed in that time period. Before that is all prehistory, before the Bronze Age, right? The Stone Age, Bronze Age, right? These are different periods in historical time. Any other questions? Yes. 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 Information, understanding, knowledge, wisdom, guidance. Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yes. 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 This is a really good question because I think this is a big problem that people get caught up in just collecting information and not learning how that information becomes wisdom, right? And so one of the most important things we're missing in our time is proper proper tarbiyah, proper suhbah, proper mentorship. So getting mentored by those who have knowledge to guide you on how to use this knowledge to become, a an Islamically developed leader, right? An Islamically trained person of knowledge in the community who is able to benefit others. So that mentorship relationship is really important because you're able to take that information and contextualize it, understand where it fits in. Otherwise, you're just, collecting opinions, collecting quotes, collecting data, but it's not actually transforming how you live your own life in terms of your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your relationship with your family, your relationship with your community, all these other domains. So I think mentorship is a really important piece that's missing. And also the way in which we learn the knowledge, having a sense of priorities and knowledge. So if somebody's starting out and they're like, oh, I want to study Islam, I'm going to start by studying the Islamic law on criminal punishments, for example, right? Like they don't have their priorities right. They need to first build the foundations, the basics, the fundamentals, build the value system, build an understanding of the message of Islam, and build up from there. Excellent. So, inshallah, we will conclude today's halaqah. Just to give you guys an overview, we've been going through this, essentially the first chapter, which is the chapter on adherence to the intellect, and I'm hopeful, inshallah ta'ala, by the end of August, we will conclude the halaqah series by finishing this chapter. We'll have finished both the history of the intellect and the first chapter of this book. Obviously, I'm not going to go through the whole book because after that, he has 50 qualities of the aql that he goes through, and each quality is another chapter. So at least to finish one chapter of the book, I think is a good accomplishment, and that will be it for the halaqah series. So hopefully by the end of August, inshallah ta'ala, we will finish the halaqah series. No, it's not translated in English. طيب جزاكم الله خيرا صلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.